White Temple, Kyoto. History of Japanese temple architecture. Japanese architecture was influenced by mainland Asia, specifically China, as many temples were built after Chinese models. This is shown as the Japanese modeled their earlier temples after the Chinese pagoda. Chinese pagodas were built with Buddhist influence, and these structures have an emphasis on verticality to mimic the form of the Bodhi tree, a sacred symbol in Buddhism. The Japanese took this pagoda form and created their own. Similarities between the pagodas include a shared emphasis on verticality, having an odd number of stories, usually 5 for luck, being part of a larger monastic complex, and having the entrances face cardinal directions. However, Chinese pagodas house Buddhist relics at its core, and Japanese pagodas act more as a landmark to mark the religious site, while another building in the complex, the Golden House, also known as the Kondo, houses the relics. Buddhism was adopted as the official religion of Japan in the 8th century CE. The presence of Buddhism replaced Shintoism, the native religion of Japan, but the emotionalism in Shinto architecture remained rather than fully adopting and conforming to Chinese Buddhist architecture. Shintoism, as a religion, is a fairly unique religion due to its lack of gods. Shintoism worshipped nature and the kami, or spirit, inside natural objects such as stone, wood, etc. When Buddhism arrived in Japan, they saw Buddha as the great kami, which led to a syncretism of both religions. While Chinese architecture was distinct against the landscape, Japanese architecture often responded to its surrounding topography. Japanese architecture was also described as less formal, as there was less of an emphasis on linear axiality and symmetry as compared to Chinese architecture. Significant buildings of Shinto include the Ise shrines, which consists of the Shrine of Naiku, also known as the inner shrine for sun god Amaterasu, and the Shrine of Geku, also known as the outer shrine for food goddess Toyouki. These shrines are usually located in a quiet forest grove with a relaxed provincial atmosphere. As follows, the Ise shrines are set in the midst of a forest of ancient and lofty cryptomeria trees. Additionally, at these shrines, there is this idea of moving from secular to sacred spaces, as shown in other civilizations. For example, the inner shrine at the Naiku complex, boundaries are created through the construction of inner and outer fences, also known as the torii gates, as depicted in the left image, to give an increasing sense of enclosure as visitors travel up to the shoden, the main sanctuary, the most sacred space. This can be seen on the site plan on the right, as visitors would pass through 2 torii gates, highlighted in red, before arriving at the inner shoden, highlighted in yellow. White Temple, Kyoto, as historic Japanese architecture. With the end of the Meiji dynasty's total isolation at the end of the 19th century, Japan began studying the political and cultural structures of North America and European countries. As an attempt to accelerate Japan's economic and technical development, foreign scientists and engineers were commissioned by the government. Additionally, many Japanese traveled abroad to work and learn in influential cities around the world, and this is no different for architects. The coalescence of knowledge from foreign architects and Japanese architects returning from abroad allowed for a modernist Japanese style. Influences include European modernist movements such as German Expressionism, Die Stilche, the Bauhaus, and more. After the Second World War, Japanese modern architecture was abruptly stopped, but with the work of Kunio Meikawa and Junzo Sakura, the modernist movement in Japan was revived. The Hiroshima Peace Center, 1956, designed by Kenzo Tange, one of Meikawa's pupils, is seen as one of Japan's first independent contributions to modern architecture. The Hiroshima Peace Center drew on ideas dealing with the new possibilities of spatial composition and structure made possible with the presence of new materials, concrete and steel. This building was unpretentious and bleak, resting on slender concrete pillars to embody the duality between the East and West. The White Temple continues this exploration of spatial composition and structure with its use of concrete combined with the Zen principles of simplicity. The White Temple, like many other shrines, is located in a larger temple complex, specifically the Zuizhen-ji Buddhist temple complex, creating a stark contrast contrast as the other structures in this monastic complex take on a more traditional architectural approach. The building itself is monolithic, continuing the idea of unity, purity, and simplicity. While the temple does take on more of a modernist approach, the interior draws back to historical Buddhist architecture. The enclosed space embedded minimal hidden skylights to create an overall womb-like chamber similar to earlier Buddhist architecture, and Buddha is raised upon a stepped altar to indicate his otherworldliness and overall importance. Japanese architectural forms and materials. Historically, Japanese architecture revolved almost exclusively on lumber due to its abundance as well as spiritual significance. In Shintoism, kami, or spirit of an object, is above all actions of human, and therefore certain locations, such as sacred groves or groups of rocks, are seen as essential in the meetings of human and kami. The importance of wood in Shintoism, due to its sacred kami, allowed preference for wood construction. This preference is also seen through the modesty and treatment of the wood, as it often remains in its purest, unpainted, and unaltered form. Similar to Chinese construction, the wood framework is often exposed. However, as Japan adopted modernism after ending total isolation, as I mentioned before, Japanese architecture was influenced by several European art movements such as the Stilj, Bauhaus, etc. Additionally, the introduction of applications of concrete allowed for a more visually uniform structure. The use of any other materials besides concrete would create the exterior to appear as countless pieces. This would defy Japan's architectural characteristics, as they value uniformity due to its emphasis rooted in Japanese aesthetic culture as well as Zen principles.